The headline inflation rate commenced 2018 with sustained deceleration of the 12th consecutive month, which it started last year, moderating to 15.13% year-on-year compared to 15.37% in December 2017. Now let's talk more about this with the head of research at Financial Derivatives Company, Damilola Akimari. Good morning, Damilola. Nice to have you in the studio.
Good morning, Chimizu.
How are you doing today?
I'm fine, thank you.
Now we've seen a drop, a consistent 12 consecutive drop on inflation rate. Well, before the inflation figures were released, FTC's think tank had expected the inflation rate to drop by about 14.90%. That's a very big drop there. So when you saw the figures out, were you kind of disappointed? Just 0.24% down.
Well, directionally, we were correct, and we were still within the margin of error. And as anticipated, most measures declined, and they moved in tandem with the headline inflation. So we saw food inflation decline to 18.92% due to the carryover from the Christmas inventory level and also harvest impact. And then also the rural and urban sub-indices also declined. And as we rightly predicted, core inflation was flat at 12.1%. But more importantly, it's the trend that is what we should be looking at, and whether this declining trend is going to be sustained in coming months.
Talking about what happened in December, one of the issues we had was the fuel scarcity, which of course has entered January. How come the effect seems to be muted in this report?
Well, if you see, actually, fuel scarcity did impact transport costs, and from what the data that the National Bureau of Statistics released, we saw that the average price of petrol across the nation was about 147 naira to a litre. So transport fares actually increased, and they were one of the components that recorded the highest increase in the core inflation index. For lubricants, transport costs, they all recorded increases. But also, there were some components that recorded a decline, and they tapered the impact of fuel scarcity, and that's why the index was flat at 12.1%. So you have to weigh all the components. So depending on the weight transport fares carry, it will determine if, at least in subsequent months, if fuel scarcity persists, whether it would impact on inflation numbers.
Now, looking at the inflationary trajectory so far, what do you make of it?
What we've seen so far, like you mentioned earlier, this is the 12th month of a consecutive decline since February 2017, and cumulatively we've seen inflation decline by about 3%. And where have we seen this trend? We've seen money supply growth has been marginal at about 1.74% in December 2017, and this compared to the CBN's benchmark of 10.29%. So money supply growth has been quite marginal. We've seen even the price of diesel decline, and diesel is the fuel that the trucks that carry food from farms to market use. From the farms to the market, the trucks use diesel, so and the price of diesel has declined. We've also seen a stable supply of forex. So by and large, these factors have influenced the trend positively, but they are subject to change. So down the line, in subsequent months, if these factors, some of these factors I've mentioned, if they alter, if they change in terms of their direction, we could see an upward movement in inflation.
Now, there seems to be some kind of disconnect here. We're seeing inflation numbers trending down, and yet domestic commodity prices are yet to kind of reflect this decline. How do you explain this disconnect?
Well, first of all, inflation measures the rate of change in the consumer price basket on a year-on-year basis. So the numbers we're talking about, we're looking at commodity prices in January 2018 vis-a-vis what they were January 2017. And what we've seen so far, we've seen that most commodities, as in the prices, have been relatively stable. Some have actually recorded a decline, like flour. As at the start of this year, the price of flour was about 10,500 naira. Now it has dropped to about 9,500. Gari has dropped from 10,500 also to about 7,000 naira. So actually, some have been stable, while most of some have also declined. But week on week, like if you look at the slides that we prepared, week on week, we've seen that commodity prices have been relatively stable.
Now, the food index,
yes,
though it came down, but it's still high. What do you make of it?
Well, the food index, it has actually been one of the major issues that even the Central Bank and the Monetary Policy Committee, when they're having their meetings, they mention that, oh, despite the fact that inflation is declining, food index still remains high. But the good thing is that it's been declining. And if you look at one of the issues that have been affecting food supply, the northern crisis, herdsmen and what have you, but also seasonal factors have also impacted on the food basket. And like what we've seen in December and in January, we've seen that due to a favorable harvest, we've seen that food index has actually declined. But in coming months now, if scarcity persists and it has a larger weight or impact on transport costs and the core index, it might actually feed into inflation numbers. But for now, we see that the food prices may remain around the same levels. But as you move towards Easter, manufacturers are going to start preparing for Easter celebrations, and they'll start raising letters of credit to bring in inventory. So that definitely would play into commodity prices.
I'm looking at the numbers. A state-by-state breakdown shows a mixed pattern. Can you explain this?
Based on the data that the National Bureau of Statistics released, we saw that out of the 36 states, about 15 of them recorded an increase in inflation. So the likes of Lagos State, Kogi, Bayelsa, Abuja, they all recorded an increase in inflation rate. And Kebbi State was the state that had the highest rate of inflation of about 18.55%. That's way above even the national average of 15.13%. And meanwhile, Delta State actually recorded the lowest. It had about 12.77%. And if you look at it on a region-by-region basis, we realize that 8 out of the 10 states that recorded the highest increase in inflation were in the north. And like I said, thinning supply, the herdsmen crisis affected them. But meanwhile, about 5 out of the 10 states that recorded the lowest increase were in the south and southeast regions. And these states are some of the states that have the highest salary arrears.
So with the inflation trending downwards now, what are we expecting of the monetary policy?
It increases the possibility of the monetary policy adopting an accommodative stance whenever they meet. We don't know when they're going to meet because of the stalemate between the legislative and the executive arm. And if you even look at our peers in sub-Saharan Africa, if you look at Angola, if you look at Uganda, Ghana, they all recorded a decline in inflation rate. And Uganda brought down its interest rate from 9.5% to 9%. So definitely, if coming back to Nigeria, if all the variables that the MPC will be watching, such as GDP growth numbers for Q4, which will be released, Q4 2017, which will be released February 2018. If you look at also the stability of the forex market, if you look at the level of reserves. So if all these variables remain positive, it definitely increases the possibility of interest rates being reduced.
We're in the middle of February. What is your forecast for February inflation? Should we also expect further decline?
So far, if you look at what has happened, commodity prices, like I mentioned earlier, because in February they've been relatively stable, and the drivers of inflation will be money supply. So if there's increased liquidity from FAC disbursements, which we expect to remain robust because all proceeds have been relatively stable. So if we expect to see increased liquidity from FAC, if this false scarcity persists also, so definitely they'll play out on inflation numbers, and in the next 1 month, we'll know what the inflation numbers will be for February.
All right, just before I let you go, what potential upside and downside risks to inflation rate do you see in 2018?
Well, for 2018, we need to look at one. Definitely, we will see increased economic activities in 2018, so that we're going to see an increase in aggregate demand, and also we expect to see increased government spending on social intervention programs, on even capital projects, and also it's the pre-election year, so definitely we're going to see increased election funds circulating around. So this would increase the level of money supply in the system. So we're projecting money supply growth of about 5 to 7% on the average, or even more. So and this definitely would create demand pull pressure. Now on the cost side, you're going to be looking at exchange rates, you're going to be looking at interest rates. So because of the anticipated increase in liquidity, we expect to see an increase in forex demand. So that might play out or affect imported inflation. But interest rates, which we believe or anticipate that at least it'll be like 100 to 200 basis points reduction. So that would at least create some sort of relief for manufacturers. So you have to factor all that in. So inflation on the average will be about 14 to 15%. That's what we're projecting for 2018.
Interesting. Thank you very much for your time, Damilola.
Thank you, Chimisi.
Damilola Akimbami is the head of research at Financial Derivatives Company.